This morning we are going to take a little break from the Exodus. We're going to leave the children of Israel right there at the foot of Mount Sinai. Listen, they got food, they got manna, they got water, they're good. They'll be there, they'll be okay. We all know they waited around for about 40 years anyway. Hopefully it won't take us 40 years to make it through the book of Exodus. But I just want to kind of turn as we begin to move into our summer months. And this morning I just want to brag on you a little bit, if that's okay. Am I allowed to do that? And just say, way to go. Okay? When I was in Bible college, way back in the Stone Ages, we had to chisel our notes on stone tablets and things like that. But we had chapel 3 times a week, and it was always mandatory. You had to go all 3 times a week, every week, the whole year. That's a lot of chapel services. I was there for 4 years, and then I was on staff for another 7. So I don't even know how many chapel services that equals. Somebody who's fast at math could probably figure that out. But it was a lot of chapel services, a whole lot. And I can remember as a student, in all honesty, kind of getting beaten up a little bit at chapel services. Like I was there to study, to do ministry, and I felt like I was never doing enough to make God happy. And it was like, you can always do more, you can always do more, you can always sacrifice more, you can always give more. Yeah, and a lot of the chapel services kind of trended that direction for whatever reason. I mean, it didn't seem like it fit, but that's how a lot of them were. In my second semester of my senior year, we had a vice president at the college. His name is Lee Walker, just a wonderful, godly man, still a good friend of mine to this day. And the different people on the faculty and staff would have a chance to do chapel. And everybody kind of liked it when Lee did a chapel service because he was a little bit, he was kind of out of the box. He wasn't like a theology guy, giving you some treatise. It was usually something really practical. And for 45 minutes, Lee just got up there and thanked us for following the Lord's leading, spending the money to go to Bible college, investing, in our future to serve God everywhere. And he just thanked us for 45 minutes. And I've pretty much forgotten all the other services. But I remember that one because somebody thanked me and it mattered. And it felt so good to just be affirmed that, it wasn't easy. I was, working jobs in the summer and doing everything to try to pay the bills to go to Bible college. And it felt so nice for somebody just to say, hey, thanks. You're doing the right thing. You're on the right track. And that's what I want to say this morning to you. Way to go. There's 7 passages that I want to read very quickly. Paul would write to churches. Most of the epistles are Paul writing to a church. Often when he was writing to a church, it was because a letter had been written to him and he was writing to sometimes he had to address difficult things that the churches, problems that the churches had, especially if you've read 1st and 2nd Corinthians, especially 1st Corinthians, you're like, wow, that was even a church. Whoa, I mean, it's pretty remarkable what they got themselves into. And he had to do a lot of fixing, but in every one of Paul's epistles, you'll find things where he gives commendations, thankfulness. Sometimes it's a specific gratitude for a person who did something to help him. Often it's to the congregation for some admirable quality or something that they did to help him or help someone else in their ministry. And I'm just going to read 7 of those. I mean, we could do pages of these, but we're just going to look at 7 short passages, just 1 or 2 verses each. And I'm just going to read them. And then there's some comments that I'd like to make. And then we're going to look at Matthew's gospel right as we close. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. So he's writing to a church that had all kinds of problems. But he says this, and now, brothers and sisters, and these won't be on the screen. Jerry, you can go ahead and back it up one. These won't be on the screen. I'm just going to read these, and then I'll have some from Matthew to read for you. And now, brothers and sisters, I want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty have welled up in rich generosity. So even though these churches were poor financially, God was helping them to be joyful and rich and abundant in their ministry. And Paul felt like I need to say something good about that. And we're still reading about those churches 2,000 years later. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. One of my favorite passages, Paul's writing to this church to encourage them, and he says, "Now about your love for one another, we don't need to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God how to love each other. And in fact, you do love all of God's family throughout Macedonia. Yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, do so even more and more." Paul didn't have to spend a few chapters telling them how to love. They had already learned. They'd been taught by God, and he wanted to commend them for that, for their love. Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 10, God is not unjust. He will not forget your work, the love that you have shown him as you have helped his people and continue to help them. How did these people show a love for God? By helping others. And he wanted to commend them for that. Philippians chapter 4, 14 through 16, "Yet it was very good of you to share in my troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except for you." Paul's going back to the early days of his ministry and how somebody had helped him in the very early days. It was this church. "For even when I was in Thessalonica, even after I left your place, you sent me out as a missionary. You sent me the aid that I needed more than once." Colossians chapter 1 and verse 6. "In just the same way, the gospel is bearing fruit and growing throughout the whole world, just as it has been doing among you since the day you heard it and truly understood God's grace." Salvation that God brings to us is meant to cause a change in the way that we live. It's meant to cause a change in our outlook. And it happens on the individual level, but it also then happens on the collective level. So a group of Christians getting together who have been affected by the gospel are going to look at the world and look at life through a different lens than the world outside. And so Paul's commending this church that the fruit of the gospel was starting to happen. The fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, all of those things. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, 7 through 8. Speaking to the Thessalonican church, "And you became a model church to all the believers in Macedonia and Achaia. The Lord's message rang out from you, not only in Macedonia and Achaia. Your faith has gone and become known everywhere." They were reaching people far beyond their walls. "Therefore, we don't need to say anything more to you." Finally, Romans 16, verse 19. "Everyone," he's writing to the church at Rome, a church that he didn't start, but he wanted to go to and visit those people. And he said, "Everyone has heard about your obedience. So I rejoice because of you. And I want you to be wise about what is good and innocent about what is evil." We have these words of Scripture from a couple thousand years ago to these churches, and Paul felt it was important. Ink wasn't cheap, paper wasn't cheap, but he felt like it's important when I'm writing these letters to make sure people know that they're encouraged and that they're appreciated. And so this morning I just want to bring just a practical few words of gratitude and appreciation for this congregation. If you're visiting with us, normally we go through books of the Bible, okay? So just today's a little different. Normally we just go through books of the Bible verse by verse, but I've just felt compelled to express some gratitude. First, I want to thank our elders. We have some wonderful elders here. It's a joy to serve on the elder board. And some of you have been on it before and you're not right now. And then we have just a wonderful group on there now. It's a blessing. Last week at our session meeting, we just went around the room and we said, what do you want to see God do in our church and in your life? And just to hear their responses, I was like, oh, man, if the Lord just gave us 3 of those things. And we went around a whole room full of 9 elders, and everybody was just saying, this is what we want God to do. And it was a blessing. I mean, I don't even think my feet were hitting the ground when I walked out of the room. Not very many pastors say that after an elders meeting. It was awesome. Thank you to our elders. The dedication to shepherding the flock. There's difficult things that you have to discuss in an elders meeting. There's policies and boring stuff too, but they plow through it and they want to lead this church spiritually. To our deacons, how can I say enough about our deacons? I mean, we recently went through a time in our church, and all of us know it, that there was just like one funeral after another. And man, they just showed up, funeral dinner. And it's such a blessing because the family doesn't have to worry about it. It's just like there's a meal. It's right there down in the fellowship hall. You go, you eat, you tell your stories, you laugh a little bit, you cry a little bit, and then you go home and somebody else cleans up for you and you don't have to worry about that. And it's a tremendous blessing to families. And that, listen, funeral dinners just scratches the surface of what our deacons do. Generosity in our community when somebody can't pay a bill, or it's astonishing the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, the diligent work that they put in. Thank you to our deacons, to our trustees. I mean, it's a welcoming environment when you come here. The air conditioners work on the hot days. The heaters work on the cold days. The bathrooms are wonderful downstairs now. I mean, it's amazing what's been accomplished here in just the last couple of years. So much diligence and hard work, and a lot of that has been work that people in our church have done. You volunteered to help out. We didn't call somebody and take the easy road and sit there and drink iced tea while somebody else did the work. People in the church did the work, and the trustees organized it, and I want to thank you for that. When I think about some of our committees, and listen, if I don't mention your specific thing, it's 11:52. I'm just going to try to do my best. Mission Shaped Church, like Touch a Truck, the Veterans Dinner, the way that we show love to veterans, the Touch a Truck event, the way that we show love to the community, and that comes through the Mission Shaped Church, and it is mountains of work behind the scenes. That doesn't just happen by accident. Meetings and going around and getting vendors, and it's mind-boggling what happens here. Your focus on loving our community is inspiring. It's part of our mission to love our neighbor. Missions and evangelism. That commitment to global missions. We're going to have some missionaries even visiting this summer. The work that goes into the dinner theater. Just so you know, over $6,000 got raised for missions with dinner theater. We're not a huge church by the mega church kind of numbers, but we're having a great impact. A church is not measured by its seating capacity, but by its sending capacity. Thank you. But it's not just global missions. We have like the Grove City Community Outreach, which reaches out to some at-risk neighborhoods. Grief Share. I can't say enough about Grief Share. Wow. I mean, and a lot of the folks who come to Grief Share aren't members of our congregation. They're people who are coming from the community. And it's not just Grief Share, but the gospel's there too. Like it's all there. It's comforting people in a time of sorrow, but it's also giving the gospel. And now we're starting to see other churches take on Grief Share because people have come here. Thank you. It's a lot of work. Those 13 weeks are difficult for the volunteers. 13 weeks in a row. And if it was 13 weeks of showing up and eating ice cream, this is 13 weeks of showing up and talking about grief. That's not easy. It takes an emotional toll. Youth ministry is just flourishing. I love coming in on a Wednesday night and seeing the kids here. Love it in the summertime because they're out there playing and just seeing children here and youth on a weekly basis being discipled. I can't thank Jen enough for her work with that, and with Vacation Bible School coming up. Tracy in the office, and Jackie for filling in for Tracy. And boy, we realized how much Tracy does while she was gone. But what a blessing. A lot of it's behind the scenes, but it keeps things running smoothly here. Our musicians. I thanked Richard in the early service. For those of you who come to the 9, sometimes he'll bring people in for special offertories and he just gives it everything he's got. And I'm just so thankful. And Beth, you and your family have done this now for a decade. And I know that you're kind of turning the page on that and you'll be stepping away from that. But we can't thank you enough. It's just a tremendous blessing, the media in the back. People serving. Thank you. Thank you for your hard work, for your creativity, and how you lead us in worship. I can't say enough about the prayer warriors in this church. Like when the little email comes out, here, when an email goes out, prayers go up. It's every single time. And people will come back. If you've ever put a prayer on the prayer chain, somebody probably the next Sunday asks you, hey, how's such and such? You know what that shows? It shows that somebody was really praying about that. It wasn't just an email that went out into the abyss of space. No, people got that, often stopped what they were doing in that moment and began praying for whatever that need was. And that takes organization, just even getting the prayer chain out there. This is a congregation that prays. And not every church is like that. If you've been here forever, you may not realize that not every church is like that. Not every church is a prayerful congregation that prays about everything. And I thank you for being that kind of a congregation. And just to the congregation at large, and we don't have time to talk about every committee and every ministry. I know that there are just countless action behind the scenes. You're the most proactive people I've ever seen. You don't say, hey, if you need anything, let me know. Some of you wake up in the morning and you figure out, this is a need and I'm just going to go meet it. And you don't even ask permission. You just meet the need. Thank you. It's a blessing to see the proactivity. Countless acts of Christian love towards the other people in the congregation, towards your neighbors. It's the embodiment of the gospel. It's why Christ saved us, and you're living it out. It's the fruit of the Spirit. Your kindness, your generosity in giving. It's overwhelming sometimes. I've been here 8 years, have never preached a service about please give money. I've never had to preach about giving. I will probably have to preach about spending at some point. Presbyterians are better at giving than spending, I've discovered. But thank you. Thank you for your giving, for your faithfulness. It matters. It's a joy to get to be your pastor. I meet with pastors all the time, and they walk in like this. You know, and I'm walking in like, I'm happy. You're a joy to pastor. I want to look at Matthew very quickly, just a few verses, and then we'll close. Jesus said this, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who traveled to a far country. He called his servants together and delivered his goods to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to his own ability. And I get the idea that these were all faithful servants to varying degrees, and so he knew he could entrust a certain amount to each one due to their faithfulness. Then he who had received 5 talents went and traded them. He made another 5 talents. Likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more. But the one who received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid the Lord's money. Now, when I was a kid, we did this activity for youth group. I don't know if anybody else has ever done this. We started at the church, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they gave each group of kids a penny. And we started with a penny. And we had to go to all the different people in the church that we wanted to go to. Like, you kind of take this neighborhood, you take this neighborhood, you take this neighborhood. And we went to church members' houses. And we started with the first one. Is there anything you would trade me for a penny? And somebody would trade something. Well, now you had something that was a little bit better than a penny. And you went to the next house and you said, is there anything that you would trade for? And it was what? And by the end, like, people were dragging in like couches and TVs and stuff. And they started with a penny. It's a great activity if you want to get rid of some junk. But the illustration is you had to trade. They had to risk the penny. If any one of those groups would have just put the penny in their pocket, they would have showed up with a penny at the end, like this guy in the parable. But everybody else put it to the test. All right, let's see what we can do. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came, and he settled accounts with them. So he who had 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you gave me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents beside them. And the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2, came and said, look, you gave me 2 talents. I have gained 2 more besides them. And the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many. Enter into the joy of the Lord. These servants were faithful, but what they are commended for is the fact that they were willing to risk. And the Christian life is about that. We have to risk. When you share your faith with a neighbor, what are you doing? You're taking a risk. When you put money in the plate instead of the bank, you've taken a risk. You've said, I think that God is going to give me more than the bank. And that's why you put it in the plate. When you do an act of kindness that was sacrificial for a neighbor, you're thinking, what I'm going to get in the long run is a better investment than what I'm going to lose right now. It's a risk. It's a calculated risk. So I commend you for your faithfulness. And I ask you to prayerfully consider what risk might the Lord have you to take. The best thing you can hear is well done. I'm saying it to you this morning, well done, but I'm also saying you're not done. Because someday we get a chance to stand before God, and that's where we get to hear the greatest well done ever. Let's pray. God, we long to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. Lord, you have blessed this church. Lord, people have received the gospel, and then the gospel has done a work in their life to change them. And Lord, we see the fruit of the Spirit evident in this congregation because you have saved us and called us to yourself. And so, Lord, it's right to praise you for the goodness that you have poured out on us. Now, Lord, help us to take that faithfulness and be willing to risk, because ultimately it's yours. Everything we have is yours. These servants risk what wasn't theirs. They risk what was their master's. So make us willing to risk what is yours. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.